This is Mongo Slade, and I'm going to discuss the foreign heel. Why don't you see it anymore? Or ask the question, is it a dead trope? True foreign heels are dead, but there will be a different kind of foreign heel. This essay will explain why I believe this, but first I need to do some definitions. For starters, a foreigner is a stranger, someone or something unfamiliar. The foreign heel operates almost solely off of stereotypes, which are shared group beliefs or an aid in explanation. This comes from McCarthy, Isabel, and Spears, 2002. Because our brains are pattern collecting devices, sorting materials and concepts into groups, once a concept or a thing is similar enough to one another, the brain groups them together. When enough people notice this pattern, a stereotype is born. Stereotypes are inevitable. It's how our brain functions, but they do change over time. Stereotypes are usually reformed through experience and the media, so newspapers, social media, TV, and are often quote unquote ripped from the headlines. It makes it easier for us to associate actions, behaviors, and beliefs to certain groups. Now that we have explained stereotypes and what a foreigner is, let's talk about sports and stereotypes. Sports and stereotypes go hand in hand. For the sake of time, I'll give you one major example. Boxing. During World War II, American boxer Joe Louis was seen as the American hero for knocking out German boxer Max Schmeling. Louis, being black, did not matter as much as him being an American. Schmeling, not being a Nazi, didn't matter as much as the simple fact that Schmeling was German during the Nazi occupation of Germany. The stereotype of evil German was spread throughout the media, and it stood on Schmeling's career for several years in the United States. Pro wrestling, of course, also played heavily on stereotypes. Italians, Greeks, Jews, all different people with different cultures and different beliefs. To make a man a babyface, he had to confirm and stand up for the beliefs of his ethnic group. In order to do this, and to counter this rather, the foreign heel had to represent counterculture to the ethnic group the babyface belonged to. Many foreign heels in wrestling were impersonating ethnically different groups. Fritz von Erich, Baron von Raschke were not real Germans. Ivan and Nikita Koloff were not real Russians. The point of these characters were to play off World War II stereotypes and help a babyface get over in front of their home audience. Later, the foreign heel began to change, become more authentic, and promoters began to switch from World War II stereotypes to Cold War stereotypes in the 1980s. During this new era, we were treated to more authentic representations of foreign heels. For instance, the real Russian Nikolai Volkov, the real Iranian, the Iron Sheik, though he is not an Arab, the real Arab, Skandar Akbar, though he was born in the United States. The decade would also give us the proliferation of the savage heel, a character said to be untamed and in need of a handler due to his lack of civility. The savage heel is often from a faraway land, draped in bizarre cultural artifacts and often barefoot, bald, or with wild, unkempt hair. Examples would be Killer Khan, Kamala, the Wild Samoans, etc. The savage heel would be considered the most racist and of all the foreign heel depictions, and slowly but surely this was phased out of regular use, though it does reemerge with Umaga in the mid-2000s. The 1980s also saw a surge of the culture clash, where the foreign heel might not be from another nation. One fine example of this is the Von Erichs versus the Fabulous Freebirds, which was often promoted as a Texas versus Georgia feud. Reminder, stereotypes are about shared group beliefs and an explanation of actions, attitudes, and behaviors. The Von Erichs represented Texas in Texas, embodied Texas values like tradition, family, religion. The Freebirds represented the opposite, rock and roll, partying, living the fast life. You also saw the rise of the white collar heel, one who violated the sensibilities of the working class audience. The American society was becoming more aware of its class differences. The rich get richer mindset had taken a hold in the United States. And like most other nations, they began to view the rich as different from themselves. For example, politicians often state that there are two Americas, one for the rich and one for everyone else. This is best embodied by Dusty Rhodes versus the Ric Flair in the birth of the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. The white collar heel is so effective, it continues to work to this day in 2020. And wrestlers often hide their wealth or hobbies to prevent alienating audiences. Dusty Rhodes, a character well established as a blue-collar voice of the people, the son of a plumber, was actually a wealthy man. Yet Dusty Rhodes never flaunted his wealth and avoided the subject completely. Another example is Japanese pro wrestler Kairi Sane. Sane, a female Japanese pro wrestler, enjoys yachting as a hobby, and her character often carried a sailing wheel to the ring. Wrestling writer Dave Meltzer employed the WWE to avoid telling people Sane enjoys yachting because it will quote-unquote make her a heel, as yachting is seen as an upper-class pastime. The best cultural heel, in my opinion, was Andy Kaufman. Kaufman was a foreigner in multiple and yet meaningful ways. Kaufman was a Hollywood actor making fun of quote-unquote hillbillies from Memphis and how they spoke and how they thought and how they behaved. A man who was not a pro wrestler and mocked pro wrestling. A male chauvinist who violated the patriarchal tradition of protecting women by actively targeting them. Kaufman's feud with Jerry Lawler was an evergreen story, and it made Kaufman one of the most effective heels of all time. The 1980s also gave birth to the traitorous heel, an American who accepts the values of a foreign nation. Crusher Khrushchev in Mid-South Wrestling was a fine example of this. Initially, he was Crusher Darsow, a woodsman from Minnesota. Darsow became enamored with the strength and abilities of Russian Nikolai Volkov. After being defeated by Volkov in a match, Darsow would turn on the U.S. and join him, becoming the traitor Crusher Khrushchev. Decked out in his Russian gear, Khrushchev will often have more heat than Volkov himself. Later, in the 1990s, Sergeant Slaughter would also take up the mantle as an Iranian sympathizer, turning his back on the United States, where he had become a popular cultural hero. In the mid-2000s, WWE wrestler Rob Conway would join Sylvain Grenier and Rene Dupree as their third member of La Resistance, a French foreign heel stable, though to much less acclaim and heat because La Resistance sucked. In many ways, the traitorous heel was seen as the most despicable. This is also human nature. Humans abhor an apostate. In most religions, a traitor is worse than a non-believer, someone who knows our values and desires and has the ability to use them against us. This is dangerous. The 1990s will also usher in a new type of heel, the racist foreign heel. While black men have been babyfaces and heels throughout the history of wrestling, the new characterization was one of glorified or denigrating audiences or other performers based on race. This role is epitomized by New Jack and Mustafa, the gangsters, in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. The gangsters typify all the racial stereotypes of the black male. Big, muscular, violent, foul-mouthed, ill-tempered, and a mostly white territory with a mostly white audience. The gangsters brought all of the worst stereotypes of 1980s gangster rap culture to the southern United States. Later, the WWF would make their own stable of black stereotypes, the Nation of Domination. Unlike the gangsters, the Nation of Domination played off of the growing movement of black separatist groups, like Louis Farrakhan-led Nation of Islam and the new Black Panther Party, which should not be mixed with the 1960s Black Panther Party, which is a different thing. The group tilted more towards being a stereotype of black males complaining about being held back by the system, utilizing black cultural items as the Black Power Fist and African symbolism. The Nation of Domination were presented as counterculture to the rest of the WWF. Counterculture would begin to dominate the conception of the foreign heel. No longer were promotions leaning on stereotyping foreign nations. This was becoming politically incorrect. So they began to create new others. The WWE is a promotion that was not shy about othering people, and in doing so, they had some success. One of the best successes came in the form of Goldust, a gender-bending character chock full of homoeroticism. While there had been many effeminate and cross-dressing wrestlers before Goldust, few had gone so far, and none had gone so far with such a large audience. While he had a female valet, The original incarnation of Goldust was not explicitly heterosexual. He was also not explicitly homosexual. Instead, Goldust used the opponents, and thus the audience's, homophobia as a psychological weapon. His obsession with sex and movies was supposed to mirror modern Hollywood's debauchery, and was a truly unique presentation for its time. Outside of Goldust, however, creating new others was proving to be a challenge. Suddenly, however, a brilliant way of doing this was to otherize competing promotions. While territory feuds had taken place before, none were as good an example as WCW versus the WWF. WCW hit pay dirt when Eric Bischoff began to book the debuting Scott Hall as an invader from the WWF. Bischoff, knowing the lingering animosity of his fans for Vince McMahon, who had killed many of the smaller southern territories, he played into that. The NWO were foreign heels representing a drastically different view of the wrestling business than the traditional WCW Southern brand. Bischoff was so on the nose, he even named Scott Hall and Kevin Nash the Outsiders, and feuded them with WCW mainstays like Sting and Lex Luger. The NWO would grow massively in popularity when they added the traitorous heel Hulk Hogan, who, much like Crusher Khrushchev and Sergeant Slaughter, actually had more heat than the other members of the group. Similarly, Paul Heyman would use the WWF and occasionally WCW branded performers as invaders in his beloved and cultish ECW brand. The ECW invasions into the WWF usually saw them as baby faces who were bringing something new and different to a stale product. But corporate wrestling was seen as bland and boring in ECW, a business of cartoonish gimmicks and selfish divas. Usually beloved wrestling figures such as Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan were seen as dinosaurs holding back younger and more athletic talent. Within that vein, Rob Van Dam began calling himself Mr. Monday Night to antagonize fans and often threatened to jump ship if he was not appreciated in ECW. His threat was met with heat, especially following the exodus of many ECW favorites to the WCW and the WWF. The gimmick worked like a charm. By the 1990s, most Western nations failed to produce a truly foreign heel, meaning one from another nation. And the foreign heels were leaning more towards subcultural foreign heels. But during this time, a popular hero managed to resurrect the dying trope. Bret the Hitman Hart, former face of the WWF, had begun a slow decline toward heeldom. Hart, a stickler for the rules and order, began to criticize the United States for its lack of fairness. The American audiences, which previously loved Hart, began to grumble at his criticisms. The American audience no longer cared about rules, fairness, or tradition. They began to embrace cheaters, liars, degenerates. The Hitman's foreign heel persona was not born out of a rip-from-the-headline story. America was not at war with Canada, nor had they begun any conflict whatsoever with Canada. Hart's heel turn was about values and national character, in which he expressed Canada's superiority. This kind of rhetoric would soon become popular in American mainstream media as journalists began to call for the United States to become more like social democracies, specifically Canada or Sweden. In this sense, the Hitman's heel turn was a decade ahead of its time. The early 2000s would typify this change. George W. Bush would become president of the United States, and the nation became fractured. After September 11th, there became a sense of, in certain circles, that the United States' xenophobia and mistreatment of foreign cultures led to the attack. Over time, self-criticism grew within the country, and the new quote-unquote foreign heel was actually a stereotype of the typical Republican voting American. The stereotype of the American citizen, brash, loud, violent, selfish, became the new heel. The character would soon be tilted towards the Republican Party, said to be the party of xenophobia, classism, and racism. The new them, quote unquote, became other Americans, and no one met this character better than John Bradshaw Layfield. JBL, while parodying George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, was quintessentially American in a way found unacceptable in the modern world. JBL often took aim at immigrants, specifically Mexicans such as Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, and the poor. He was a red, white, and blue bully in the way many coastal elites had come to think of quote-unquote flyover states like their Midwestern and Southern friends. The separation would occur once more in 2013. Years prior, mounting political pressure led Republican voters to take to the streets in mass protests. This would become known as the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party was viewed by the mainstream media as resentful, xenophobic, and hateful, and from this vision was born the character of the quote-unquote real American, Jack Swagger, an anti-immigration American nationalist. Swagger was often shadowed to the ring by his uncle Zeb Coulter, who was really legendary wrestler Dutch Mantel, and the character was named after political commentator Ann Coulter, who was a Republican. Before Swagger's matches, Uncle Zeb would spew anti-immigrant diatribes about people sneaking across the border to freeload in the United States. The character of Swagger and Zeb played well, garnering plenty of heat and support for immigrant babyface Alberto Del Rio. Later, fans chanted "We the People" along with Swagger and seemingly enjoyed the gimmick, but after criticism from Fox News about the mockery of the Republican Party, the character was neutered and thus never reached its full potential. In recent years, the 2010s and 2020s, the foreign heel has not died out. While it has not died out completely, there was the excellent Russian Rusev run in 2015, but liberal sensibilities about xenophobia has forced most promotions to stay away from it. Many recent attempts in foreign heeldom, true foreign heeldom, mind you, such as WWE's garbage stable, the League of Nations, have fallen flat. An inability to lean into stereotypes, or there simply being no stereotype to lean into, such as the case with Cesaro, who is from Switzerland. What do we have negative about Switzerland? In 2011, 2012, it's coupled with anti-Americanism. We rarely see any good true foreign heels anymore. In the modern United States, cultural icons such as Superman can no longer represent quote-unquote truth, justice, and the American way. Where Captain America is reimagined as a Nazi sleeper agent, protesters destroy public statues of the founders of the nation, and where a wrestler was punished for supporting the president on Twitter, there is no place for patriotism. The society has decided that nationalism is the new evil. The American is the other. This emerging generation of views themselves as citizens of the world, looking to gel more with Europeans and Canadians rather than their Americans in the States. Sports, too, have taken a decidedly anti-American bent where athletes kneel for the national anthem and openly disrespect the flag, acts which would have been unconscionable just a generation prior. The foreign heel operates off of stereotypes, simple us versus them. However, many see this as nation versus nation. It is also values versus values, rich versus poor, in-group versus out-group. No longer is the foreign heel from another nation. Now he is likely your neighbor who votes differently from you, or your neighbor who is from a different race. While the roots of the trope may be considered racist or xenophobic, it is widely used in mainstream media, even to this day, like in television shows and in movies. Thus, it is still largely in use and quite effective. Wrestling mirrors the mainstream. The United States and many Western nations simply don't see any foreign people as more evil than themselves, despite all evidence to the contrary. Therefore, there is no longer a need for the archetype of the foreign heel. The enemy is us. What was once a fun way to create camaraderie on the basis of nationality, erasing momentarily the concept of race, class, and religion, has fizzled into obscurity with only flashing specks remaining. This presentation has been about explaining the legacy of foreign heels and why you rarely see them anymore. I hope I have done so. I thank you for your time. Like, share, and subscribe. Feedback is appreciated. Thank you very much.